It is said that truth is often stranger than fiction. And in the case of the tumultuous relationship between the mighty Zhao Kuangyin, known to history as the founder of the Song dynasty, and the ill-fated lovers Pan Jinlian and Võ Đại Lang, the line between history and legend is impossible to trace. Whether this story is a dramatic embellishment or the truth twisted by time, it has lived on for centuries in the whispers of Chinese folklore. As we embark on this tale, we must understand that what follows may be exaggerated, romanticized, and turned into myth, yet, like many historical stories, carries with it a kernel of truth that continues to captivate. In the year 960, China was a fractured land, plagued by decades of division, war, and chaos. The warlords of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms had torn the empire into pieces. But out of this ruin, a single figure rose, Zhao Kuangyin, later crowned Emperor Taizu of the Song dynasty. Through skill, cunning, and decisive action, he brought an end to the chaos and unified the Middle Kingdom under one banner once more. But behind this emperor's rise to power, behind his imperial robes and the weight of the throne, lay a story far more personal, one that began with a woman of unmatched beauty and a man of humble origins. Caught in a web of desire, ambition, and betrayal, the true story of Zhao Kuangyin, Pan Jinlian, and Võ Đại Lang is a complex dance of love and treachery that intertwined personal lives with the fate of nations. And as with all such stories, the lines between loyalty, desire, and betrayal blurred in the shadows of power. Though Pan Jinlian is perhaps best known in Chinese literature as a femme fatale from the classic Water Margin, the real woman, a clever, ambitious, and independent beauty, was far more than just the subject of literary scandal. Her beauty and wit captivated men, and her longing for something greater than the life she led drew her into a dangerous relationship with Zhao Kuangyin. And at the heart of it all was Võ Đại Lang, her devoted, but naive, husband, a man caught in the thrall of a political game far larger than he could ever comprehend. This story, though set against the backdrop of grand historical events, is ultimately one of love, loss, and the pursuit of power. It is a tale where the line between right and wrong, between fidelity and desire, is impossible to draw. Here, history and fiction collide, and the consequences of betrayal reach beyond the personal and ripple out across the destiny of a dynasty. But before we begin, one must remember, this is a tale of power and passion, of a woman caught between 2 men, one driven by ambition, the other by love, and the empire that watched it all unfold. In the coming chapters, prepare yourself for a journey through the courtrooms of the Northern Song dynasty, where history and myth intertwine and where one man's rise to power is shadowed by a love triangle that will define the fates of those caught in its web. The year was 960. And the Middle Kingdom was in a state of ruin. The great Tang dynasty had long since fallen, and what remained was a fractured landscape, ruled by various warlords vying for dominance. This era, known as the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, was one of constant strife, but it was also a time when destiny seemed to favor the strong, the bold, and the ambitious. Zhao Kuangyin, a military general under the later Zhou dynasty, had little idea that his future would take him from the chaos of battlefield to the splendor of an emperor's palace. His rise was swift, born not only of his military acumen but also of a calculated move that would shape the future of the nation. Through a cunning palace coup, Zhao dethroned the last ruler of the Zhou dynasty, establishing the Song dynasty and crowning himself Emperor Taizu. As the first emperor of the Song, Zhao's reign would be remembered for its strength, wisdom, and the consolidation of power. But there was more to Zhao Kuangyin's story than his conquest of the kingdom, a story wrapped in passion, intrigue, and a woman whose fate would intertwine with his own in a way that would change their lives forever. Pan Jinlian, the name of a woman who, though she existed in the shadow of Zhao's grandeur, would leave an indelible mark on his heart and mind. She was married to Võ Đại Lang, a man of humble origin, yet one whose kindness and devotion made him a loving husband. Together, They lived a modest life in the village of Linen, in what would later become the heart of the Song capital. Jinlian was a striking beauty, her features delicate yet filled with a fierce intelligence that few men truly understood. The love she had for her husband was sincere, but it was also marked by a deep yearning. A yearning for a life more exciting than what her humble surroundings could offer. In Linen, life for Jinlian was simple. She spent her days weaving, cooking, and tending to the household with a quiet grace. Her love for Dalang was a quiet love, one built on mutual respect and shared dreams. However, as with many stories of love, fate often intervenes in ways no one expects. In the midst of her peaceful, contented life, Zhao Kuangyin's forces would march through Linen, unknowingly setting in motion a series of events that would lead to a fateful encounter. It was a rare occurrence for the Song armies to pass through the small village. Zhao, fresh from his conquest of the surrounding territories, was on a campaign to consolidate power. It was then that he laid eyes on Jinlian. As the emperor's entourage passed by the town, he stopped briefly to observe the humble village. Drawn by the rumors of its beauty and tranquility, it was here that he first saw her, a vision of grace, standing beside a small market stall, weaving intricate patterns with her hands. Zhao was not a man prone to idle fascination, but there was something about this woman that captivated him in a way he could not explain. Her eyes, dark yet sharp, seemed to pierce through him, and her presence emanated an aura of mystery. Zhao, ever the strategist, realized that she could be the key to something far more than a passing infatuation. For a man who had just secured the throne of an empire, the conquest of a woman was another kind of victory, one that would prove his strength not only as a ruler but also as a man of irresistible allure. But Zhao knew that a direct approach would be too brazen, too out of place for an emperor of his stature. Instead, he devised a more subtle plan. He commanded that a messenger be sent to the village, carrying with him a gift, a delicate, hand-painted scroll bearing the emperor's seal. The scroll was a token of appreciation for the village, a symbol of the emperor's power and benevolence. Yet, hidden within the scroll was a personal note, addressed to Jinlian, inviting her to meet him in private under the pretense of discussing matters of state. Jinlian, both flattered and confused, could not resist the allure of such a rare opportunity. To meet the emperor, what could it mean? Was it a simple act of kindness, or was there something more? Driven by a mix of curiosity and apprehension, she agreed to the invitation. The meeting took place in a quiet chamber within the emperor's mobile palace. Jinlian was led through the grand halls, her heart racing with each step. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to change forever. When she entered the room, there stood Zhao Kuangyin, regal in his emperor's robes, his presence imposing yet oddly inviting. First, their conversation was formal, polite. Zhao spoke of his admiration for the beauty of the village and the hardworking people who lived there. But as the conversation turned more personal, Zhao's charm began to unfold. He spoke of his past, of the burdens of ruling a vast empire, and how, despite his power, there were still parts of his soul that yearned for something more, something real, something genuine. Jinlian, moved by the sincerity in his voice, found herself drawn to him, though she had once been content with her simple life. The emperor's words stirred something inside her, a desire for adventure, for a life beyond the ordinary. The attraction was mutual, though neither of them fully realized how deep it would run. As the evening wore on, Zhao's affections for Jinlian became clear. He expressed his admiration for her beauty, her intelligence, and the quiet grace with which she carried herself. It was a dangerous game he was playing, one that would have consequences far beyond their first meeting. Jinlian, though still unsure of her own feelings, could not deny the pull of his power and presence. And so, in the stillness of that chamber, a dangerous spark was lit. Zhao Kuangyin, the emperor of the Song, had set his sights on a woman who was not his to take. Yet, in that moment, neither he nor Jinlian could have known the fateful path they were about to embark on. a path that would lead to betrayal, heartbreak, and the downfall of more than one life. In the midst of Zhao Kuangyin's rise to power, the Song dynasty was not only marked by political intrigue and war, but also by personal relationships that would come to alter the fate of many lives. Among these relationships, none was more complicated or controversial than that between the emperor and Pan Jinlian. Pan Jinlian was a woman of unmatched beauty, born in the rural heartland of the empire but destined to become the wife of the well-known Wu family. Yet, it wasn't just her beauty that caught the eye of men across the land. It was her intelligence and cunning, two qualities that made her dangerous in the world of courtly intrigue. It was during the time when Zhao Kuangyin was consolidating power that Pan Jinlian first came into his view. The early days of his reign were fraught with political instability, and Zhao, despite his title, was still struggling to establish control over the fragmented empire. His court was filled with influential families, including the Wu family, whose wealth and political connections were a formidable force. Pan Jinlian's beauty had long been recognized by the men of the court, but it was her calculating nature that piqued the interest of the emperor. She was not just a passive observer of the power plays surrounding her. She was an active participant, using her charms and intelligence to manipulate those around her. While many women of the time were mere pawns in the games of men, Pan Jinlian was a queen on the chessboard, playing each move with careful precision. But what set her apart was the fact that she, unlike other women, seemed to sense the cracks in the political foundation of Zhao Kuangyin's newly established rule. In the years before his consolidation of power, Zhao had been viewed as a military leader, a man capable of seizing power by force but not necessarily one with the political acumen to rule a divided China. Pan Jinlian, ever the perceptive woman, saw in him an opportunity. If she could sway Zhao's heart, she could secure her place in the future of the empire. First, her advances were subtle. Pan Jinlian would attend the banquets, where the emperor and his generals would gather to celebrate victories or discuss military strategies. She spoke with the men in a way that balanced flirtation and flattery. Her words were soft, yet pointed, and every gesture she made seemed to draw attention without overtly demanding it. The emperor, however, was not a man easily swayed. Known for his sharp mind and keen awareness of the political landscape, Zhao Kuangyin kept his distance, carefully observing Pan Jinlian. But as the months passed, a subtle game began to unfold between them, one where neither would acknowledge their mutual interest, but both knew it existed. It was at one such gathering that Pan Jinlian made her boldest move. As Zhao Kuangyin spoke of his plans for the future of the empire, she listened intently, her eyes locked on him. The room was filled with advisors and generals, but for a brief moment, it felt as though the two of them were the only ones in existence. Her smile, though gentle, conveyed a message that Zhao could not ignore. It was not just a smile of admiration. It was a smile that invited him to venture beyond the political games and into the realm of personal connection. This, of course, was the beginning of the empire's greatest unspoken scandal. Zhao Kuangyin, having spent years leading armies and defeating rivals, was now caught in a battle that was far more dangerous than any military campaign. He was caught in the web of desire, of a love that could not be acknowledged without consequence. As their relationship deepened, so did the political implications of their connection. Pan Jinlian's husband, Võ Đại Lang, though an intelligent man, was unaware of the growing bond between his wife and the emperor. Võ Đại Lang had always been content with his position in society, secure in the wealth and status of his family. He had no reason to suspect that his wife, whose beauty was admired by all, was harboring secret ambitions of her own. But unbeknownst to Võ Đại Lang, the whispers of Pan Jinlian's involvement with Zhao Kuangyin were already beginning to spread. In the halls of the palace, nothing could remain hidden for long, especially not a love affair involving the emperor. And though Zhao was careful, he was not infallible. He had made mistakes, small gestures that his enemies would notice, and in a court as dangerous as his, Even the smallest mistake could have monumental consequences. As the months passed, the empire became more aware of the emperor's growing attachment to Pan Jinlian. And with that, the seeds of jealousy, ambition, and rivalry were sown. But what none of them knew was that this love triangle was only the beginning. It would set in motion events that would unravel not only the lives of Pan Jinlian, Võ Đại Lang, and Zhao Kuangyin, but the very foundations of the Song dynasty itself. While Pan Jinlian's beauty and intelligence were drawing the attention of Emperor Zhao Kuangyin, there was another figure whose presence in her life would soon become a critical part of this complex and tragic tale: Võ Đại Lang, the man who would be her husband. Võ Đại Lang was a man of humble origins, raised in a small village far from the intrigues of the imperial court. He was known for his simple nature, hard-working demeanor, and loyalty. Unlike the ambitious men and women surrounding the emperor, Dalang had no grand aspirations of power or wealth. His world revolved around his family, his modest trade, and his deep love for his wife, Pan Jinlian. In the early years of their marriage, they shared a quiet life, untouched by the politics of the empire, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf them. Pan Jinlian, however, was never satisfied with the mundane life of a merchant's wife. She had tasted the allure of power, the sweetness of influence, and the intoxicating feeling of being desired by the most powerful man in the land, Emperor Zhao Kuangyin. It was at a lavish banquet, held in the emperor's palace to celebrate a minor victory over a neighboring kingdom, that the two first truly locked eyes. Pan Jinlian had been invited as part of her husband's connections to the Wu family, but she had not anticipated how closely she would catch the attention of the emperor. It wasn't just her beauty, though it was indeed captivating. It was the way she carried herself, the sharpness of her wit, and the way she spoke to the men of the court with a confidence that rivaled even the most seasoned politicians. It was clear to Zhao that she was no ordinary woman, and so began the delicate game of attraction and manipulation. Zhao Kuangyin, though a man of power, was not blind to the undercurrents of the court. He knew that any move he made towards Pan Jinlian would be scrutinized by his advisors, his generals, and the other nobles who surrounded him. But he was a man who had fought for his position and understood that power was not just about military conquest or strategic alliances. It was about control, about the ability to bend others to one's will. Pan Jinlian, on the other hand, was fully aware of the power she held in the emperor's gaze. She played the role of the dutiful wife in front of her husband, Võ Đại Lang, all the while nurturing a hidden ambition. She had always known that to truly secure her place in the annals of history, she would need to align herself with those who had power, and there was no greater power in the empire than Zhao Kuangyin. As the months passed, their interactions grew more frequent. Subtle exchanges in the grand halls of the palace, private whispers in the corners of official meetings, and stolen moments that no one else seemed to notice. In the beginning, Võ Đại Lang was oblivious to the growing connection between his wife and the emperor. He trusted her implicitly, believing in the love and loyalty they had shared since their early years together. But as Pan Jinlian's affections began to shift, so too did the balance of power in their relationship. Her once innocent marriage to Dalang began to fracture, cracked by the silent promises she had made to herself. The more Zhao Kuangyin courted her with his attention, the more distant she became from her husband. Võ Đại Lang, despite his simple nature, was not a fool. He began to sense that something was amiss. The warmth that had once defined his home was slowly turning to coldness. Pan Jinlian's smiles seemed more forced, her words more distant. She had become preoccupied, her mind consumed by thoughts of the emperor, the power he could offer, and the life that could be hers if she could just make the right choice. The first sign of the inevitable confrontation came when Dalang stumbled upon a letter, one that Pan Jinlian had kept hidden from him. It was a letter addressed to the emperor, written in a poetic hand, full of the type of yearning that could not easily be ignored. The letter spoke of admiration, but there were hints, small but undeniable, of something deeper, something more dangerous. It was the first time Dalang had been forced to confront the truth that his wife, the woman he had once known so intimately, had begun to fall under the spell of another man. The betrayal, however, was not as simple as a lover's affair. It was tied to the greater forces of power and ambition that defined the court of the emperor. Jinlian had no interest in love for love's sake. She sought something far more valuable: status, influence, and the promise of a life beyond the simple, confining walls of her husband's modest household. But with every step she took toward the emperor, she was pulling herself further away from the life she had known. Her decision to align with Zhao Kuangyin was not a decision she made lightly. It was a dangerous gamble, for the emperor's affection, though potent, was a fleeting thing. The price of such power was steep, and there was no guarantee of loyalty from a man who had risen to the throne through bloodshed and betrayal. But Jinlian, ever ambitious, believed she could navigate the perilous waters of the court, and so her affair with the emperor deepened, even as her marriage to Võ Đại Lang began to unravel. Võ Đại Lang, torn between his love for his wife and his growing suspicions, was thrust into a silent war. He knew his position as a humble merchant's husband had little chance of competing with the emperor's vast power. But the love he felt for Jinlian was not something he could easily cast aside. And so, he began to watch from the shadows, waiting for the inevitable moment when the full extent of his wife's betrayal would come to light. As the emperor's power grew, so too did Jinlian's influence in the court. She became a fixture in the royal palace, a woman whose counsel was sought on matters of state. Even though she had no official position, her beauty, her intellect, and her ability to weave her desires into the fabric of the empire had made her indispensable to the emperor. But in the quiet moments, when the court was still and the moon hung high over the palace, Jinlian could not escape the looming presence of Võ Đại Lang. Her actions had set in motion a tragedy that neither she nor the emperor could fully control. And as the political tides of the Song dynasty began to shift, so too would the fate of those caught in this dangerous web of power, love, and betrayal. As the years passed and Zhao Kuangyin's reign solidified, the power and wealth of the Song dynasty grew, but so too did the tensions within its walls. Behind the imperial palace, in the lush chambers of the court, the emperor's eyes lingered on more than just his empire. He found himself captivated by Jinlian in a way that even his most loyal advisors could not have anticipated. Zhao's longing for Jinlian was not the shallow infatuation of a man lusting after a beautiful woman. It was a deeper desire, rooted in her intelligence, her wit, and the unspoken understanding that she, like him, was capable of manipulating the world around her. He saw in her a reflection of himself, a person who was not bound by the restrictions of social norms, but instead, one who could shape her own destiny. But for Jinlian, the relationship was never about admiration or affection. She had always been a woman of ambition, and to her, Zhao Kuangyin represented not just power, but an opportunity to climb even higher in the world of the elite. She had already tasted the fruits of manipulation, knowing that a man like Zhao could offer her not only personal gain, but the kind of influence that would forever elevate her in the eyes of history. She was determined to have him, even if it meant betraying the only man who had ever truly loved her, Võ Đại Lang. Their secret meetings began as whispers in the darkened corners of the palace, where Zhao, despite being the emperor, was not immune to the dangers of his own desires. First, the emperor was careful. He spoke to her with the language of power, hinting at the ways in which they could both benefit from their union. He flattered her, admired her, and slowly, she began to warm to him. His courtiers, loyal to their emperor but unaware of his private dealings, had no clue what was happening in the shadows. Only the emperor and Jinlian knew the extent of the relationship, and, to her, it was not just an affair, but a chance for her to outwit and outmaneuver all those who had underestimated her. It was during these secretive meetings that Zhao began to reveal more of his heart. Jinlian, with her silken words and carefully chosen gestures, drew him in deeper, until the emperor, a man known for his steel resolve and command over the entire kingdom, found himself powerless against the woman he had come to desire. However, love in the court of the emperor was never simple. Every secret affair, every whispered word, had consequences, especially for the innocent bystanders who would unknowingly find themselves caught in the web of betrayal. Võ Đại Lang, the humble merchant husband of Pan Jinlian, remained blissfully unaware of the growing tension between his wife and the emperor. His love for her was pure and unyielding, and he had no reason to suspect that his simple life was about to be upended. Pan Jinlian knew that her husband would never stand in her way, not because he lacked the courage, but because he was utterly blind to the machinations of the world around him. He trusted her completely, and she took advantage of that trust. As her bond with Zhao deepened, Pan Jinlian began to distance herself from Dalang, her once loving husband. She no longer found satisfaction in the quiet, simple life they shared. Her dreams were no longer of a modest home and a comfortable life. Instead, her thoughts were consumed with the idea of wielding the true power of an empress at Zhao's side. But love, or rather the absence of it, would lead to unforeseen consequences. The more Pan Jinlian ingratiated herself with Zhao, the more her need for control grew. She became ambitious in a way that few could understand, blinded by her own desires, and though she played her cards with grace and precision, she was not prepared for the ripple effects her actions would send through the lives of those she had once cared for. As Zhao Kuangyin's affection for her intensified, so did the tension in the palace. His court was filled with whispers. There were rumors of his growing fondness for Pan Jinlian, and these whispers would not remain just that, rumors. The emperor's closest confidants began to notice the shift in his behavior, and the once tightly held reins of power were starting to slip. Some courtiers warned him against furthering the relationship with Pan Jinlian, knowing full well that it would ignite scandal in the heart of the empire. But Zhao, consumed by the intoxicating allure of the woman who had so masterfully played her cards, brushed aside their warnings. His mind was already made up. He had no intention of letting her slip away, and his desire for her had grown far beyond what his advisors could ever have imagined. Meanwhile, in the quiet, unassuming home of Võ Đại Lang, the reality of the situation began to take form. Pan Jinlian's increasing absences and the coldness that had settled between them did not go unnoticed. Dalang, a man of simple virtues, was not blind to the signs, but he struggled with the truth. His love for his wife had always been deep and unshakable, and the idea that she might be unfaithful to him was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet, in his heart, he knew that something had changed. As Pan Jinlian continued to dance her dangerous dance between her husband and the emperor, the lives of all three were being irrevocably altered. Her ambition and betrayal were sowing seeds of destruction, seeds that would grow to bear fruit in the most unexpected and tragic of ways. In the emperor's court, the pressure was mounting, and though Zhao Kuangyin was a master of power and strategy, even he would soon learn that love, once tangled in lies and betrayal, had consequences far greater than any battle he had ever fought. The days grew darker within the imperial court, as the secret liaison between Emperor Zhao Kuangyin and Pan Jinlian deepened. What had started as fleeting moments of stolen glances and whispered conversations now morphed into a dangerous game, a web of desire and manipulation that threatened to unravel the lives of all involved. But in the shadows, there was one man who remained blissfully unaware of the growing storm that loomed over him: Võ Đại Lang. Võ Đại Lang had never suspected that the woman he loved, the woman he had pledged his life to, was slowly being drawn into the orbit of one of the most powerful men in the empire. He was a simple man, devoted to his trade and to his wife, believing in the trust that had been built between them over the years. The world of politics, scheming, and court intrigue seemed far removed from the quiet life they had once shared. And yet, as Pan Jinlian grew closer to Zhao Kuangyin, Võ Đại Lang found himself slipping further into the darkness of ignorance. In the beginning, Pan Jinlian had kept her affair with the emperor carefully hidden, though it was becoming more and more difficult to maintain the secrecy. Zhao Kuangyin, with his unrelenting ambition, was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and Pan Jinlian, with her own ambitions, had no intention of turning back now. Her feelings for Dalang had long since faded, replaced by a burning desire for power, wealth, and the thrill of playing a dangerous game. She reveled in the control she had over both men, knowing full well the consequences of her actions. But even in the midst of her growing lust for power, Pan Jinlian could not ignore the feelings of guilt that occasionally crept in. She loved Dalang, in her own twisted way, and yet she had begun to feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on her. In the quiet moments, when she would lie awake in the emperor's bed, she would think of her husband, of the years they had spent together, of his loyalty and simplicity, and a sense of remorse would wash over her. But that remorse was fleeting, quickly replaced by the undeniable truth. There was no turning back. The breaking point came one autumn evening, when Dalang returned to their modest home after a long day of work. As he stepped through the door, he found his wife sitting in the corner of the room, her expression unreadable, her eyes distant. The light of the lanterns flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. But it was the coldness in Pan Jinlian's gaze that chilled him to the bone. He had grown accustomed to her beauty, her charm, but tonight there was something different. Something about her was slipping away from him, like sand through his fingers. Pan Jinlian. He spoke her name softly, almost as a whisper. What's wrong? You've been distant lately. She didn't answer at first, her hands nervously folding and unfolding in her lap. Pan Jinlian had never been one to shy away from confrontation. But this moment, this was something entirely different. She knew that once she spoke the words, nothing would ever be the same. There was no returning to the innocence of their marriage, no unbreaking the bond that was about to shatter. I've been busy, she replied, her voice lacking its usual warmth. There are things that I must attend to. Võ Đại Lang, his brow furrowing with concern, stepped closer to her. What do you mean? Are you seeing someone else? His voice was low, as if he were afraid to hear the answer. Pan Jinlian's eyes met his for a brief moment, and in that fleeting second, a world of emotion passed between them, guilt, regret, and the undeniable truth of her betrayal. But she quickly masked it, the cold mask of a woman who had long ago abandoned the simplicity of love for the intoxicating allure of power. Võ Đại Lang, she said, her voice steady now, but her heart pounding in her chest. You have always been loyal to me. You have given me everything I could ever ask for. But I can no longer be the woman you want me to be. There are forces beyond us now. His face turned pale. He staggered back, as if struck by a physical blow. What do you mean? Who is it? Who have you been seeing behind my back? Pan Jinlian took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. I've been seeing Emperor Zhao Kuangyin. The words hung in the air like an unspoken curse, a revelation that shattered the fragile world they had built together. Võ Đại Lang's expression twisted in disbelief, his mind struggling to comprehend the weight of her confession. The silence that followed was suffocating. For what felt like an eternity, neither spoke. The flickering light of the lanterns seemed to echo the trembling of Dalang's heart. The man who had once trusted her, loved her with a devotion unmatched, now stood before her. A man broken by the realization that the woman he had loved had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. You've been with him all this time? He whispered, his voice barely audible. And you think I wouldn't find out? Pan Jinlian stood up slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had been prepared for this moment, had rehearsed the words she would say, but nothing could have prepared her for the look in Dalang's eyes, the pain, the heartbreak, and the betrayal. I never meant for it to happen like this, she said softly, but I cannot undo what has been done. Zhao Kuangyin is the emperor. He offers me power, wealth, everything that I could ever desire. and I can no longer deny that part of me craves it." Võ Đại Lang's eyes filled with tears, but he wiped them away angrily, his fists clenching. "You think power is everything? You think being with him will bring you happiness?" For the first time in their marriage, Jinlian saw the depth of his hurt, and for just a moment, a flicker of remorse rose in her heart. But she quickly shut it down. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. "Yes," she said, her voice hardening, "I think it will." As the illicit relationship between Jinlian and Emperor Zhao Kuangyin grew more intense, the palace became a place of whispered rumors and hidden tensions. The once great and noble emperor, who had unified a fractured kingdom, was now bound by an affair that threatened not only his personal integrity but the very stability of the Song dynasty. But while Zhao reveled in the power of his forbidden love, the heart of Jinlian beat with a mixture of ambition and disdain for the man she had once called her husband. Võ Đại Lang was, to her, a mere obstacle in the path of her true desires. She no longer saw him as the simple, devoted man who had shared her bed and her life, but as a pawn, someone who could be discarded once the emperor had fully claimed her as his own. Yet, deep within the folds of her conscience, there was a gnawing sense of guilt. Jinlian was not a heartless woman. Her heart had once belonged to Dalang, and there were fleeting moments when she thought of their earlier years, the laughter they had shared, the simple pleasures of their village life. But the emperor had awakened something in her, something dark and insatiable. It was no longer love she sought but power, and the road to it was paved with deceit and betrayal. For Võ Đại Lang, the weight of his ignorance was becoming unbearable. His heart had never questioned his wife's devotion, but it seemed as though a subtle shift was taking place within their home. She had become distant, her once warm gaze now cold and calculating. His questions were met with evasions, her affection now replaced with a hollow smile. It was in these quiet moments of doubt that the seeds of betrayal were sown. It was on one fateful evening that Võ Đại Lang finally stumbled upon the truth, an accidental discovery that would shatter his world forever. Returning home early from a trip to the market, he had intended to surprise his wife with a gift, but instead, he found her in a moment of private reflection. Jinlian was speaking to someone in a hushed voice, a voice that was unmistakable, one that belonged to none other than Emperor Zhao Kuangyin. Võ Đại Lang stood frozen in the doorway, his heart sinking as the weight of the betrayal hit him. He had never been naive enough to believe that his wife was untouched by the desires of men, but he had always trusted her love. Now, that trust lay in tatters before him. The realization was a knife to the heart. He left the house that night, not knowing where he was going, his mind a blur of anger, confusion, and sorrow. How had it come to this? How had the woman he had loved, the woman who had once shared in the simplicity of life, become so consumed by power and lust? It was a question that would never have an answer. For Jinlian, the discovery was a mere inconvenience. She knew that Võ Đại Lang would eventually find out, but she had already made her decision. The emperor was the only man who could elevate her beyond the confines of a merchant's wife. Her allegiance was no longer to the man who had once given her everything. It was now to the emperor, whose power would shape the future of an entire dynasty. That evening, as Dalang wandered the streets of the capital, lost in a sea of despair, Jinlian prepared herself for the next phase of her life, one where love, loyalty, and decency had no place. Her heart had long since been lost to ambition, and now she would take whatever steps necessary to ensure her place by the emperor's side. But even as Jinlian planned her ascent, she could not shake the nagging thought that the game she was playing was far more dangerous than she had anticipated. In the court of Zhao Kuangyin, where every move was calculated and every ally a potential enemy, there was no room for weakness. She had cast aside her old life, but the cost of her ambition was yet to be realized. As for Zhao Kuangyin, the emperor was at a crossroads of his own. He had conquered the empire, but in his pursuit of Jinlian, He had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Pan Jinlian was a woman who understood power as few others did. But her machinations would not go unnoticed. The court was filled with spies and ambitious men, each eager to seize power for themselves. Zhao's relationship with Pan Jinlian, though seemingly a victory of love and lust, was becoming a liability, one that could unravel the very foundation of his rule. The final act of this tragic tale had not yet come to pass. But the fates of these three individuals, Zhao Kuangyin, Pan Jinlian, and Võ Đại Lang, were now irrevocably intertwined. What had begun as a simple affair of passion and desire would soon ignite a scandal that would shake the Song dynasty to its core. In the world of emperors, warriors, and schemers, no one could escape the consequences of their actions, and the price of betrayal was always higher than anyone could foresee. As the night deepened and the stars flickered above the capital, the story of love, ambition, and betrayal continued to unfold, a story that would echo through the halls of history for generations to come. The days turned into weeks, and the undercurrents of tension that had long simmered beneath the surface of the Song Empire were now on the verge of exploding. Emperor Zhao Kuangyin, whose hands had once held the fate of the nation, was now caught in the grasp of his own desires. His once unshakable resolve had been replaced with an obsession that threatened not only his reign but his very soul. For Pan Jinlian, the reality of her situation had become impossible to ignore. What had started as an affair driven by ambition and lust was now a power struggle, a dangerous game where every move could mean life or death. The emperor, with his imperial power, had promised her the world, but the promises were fragile. She was aware of the precariousness of their position, and she knew that if the emperor's affections ever waned, she would be discarded just as easily as she had been taken in. And yet, there was a part of her that still longed for the simplicity of her life with Võ Đại Lang. In the quiet moments, when the weight of her decisions pressed down upon her, she could hear the faint echo of their past, the quiet laughter of her husband, the warmth of their shared life. But those memories felt like distant echoes, lost in the shadow of the emperor's promises. Võ Đại Lang, on the other hand, had reached the breaking point. The suspicion that had gnawed at him for months had finally turned to certainty. He had watched the subtle changes in his wife, the way she would disappear for days, the coldness in her touch when they lay together. Something had shifted. The love they once shared had become a fragile thread, unraveling before his eyes. His heart ached, but his mind could no longer deny the truth. Pan Jinlian was no longer the woman he had married. One evening, after yet another distant conversation with his wife, Võ Đại Lang made a decision. He would confront the emperor. He knew that doing so would mean the end of his life as he knew it, but it was a risk he was willing to take. His heart, broken but filled with a raw sense of justice, drove him to the palace, under the cover of night, with the moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. Võ Đại Lang made his way toward the emperor's private quarters. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, though he knew full well that no blade could pierce the web of power that surrounded Zhao Kuangyin. But vengeance, he told himself, was not always about victory. Sometimes, it was simply about standing up to the cruelty of fate. Meanwhile, Pan Jinlian had come to a realization of her own. She had played the game well, too well perhaps, but the toll it had taken on her soul was starting to show. She had won the emperor's affection, had tasted the power she had so desperately craved, but in the end, it had only hollowed her out. As she stood in her chambers, staring out at the darkened city, she felt a deep emptiness settle in her chest. The emperor, for all his grandeur and ambition, was just a man flawed, insecure, and eventually, she knew, would abandon her as he had done so many others. And so, on that fateful night, as the emperor was preparing to retire to his chambers, the lives of all three would collide in a tragic, irreversible moment. Võ Đại Lang had reached the gates of the inner palace, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and anger. but also with a strange sense of finality. He was prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him. But as he approached the palace's grand hall, the sound of footsteps halted him in his tracks. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman. It was Jinlian. Her eyes were wide with surprise, and for the briefest moment, the facade she had so carefully constructed began to crack. "Võ Đại Lang," she whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "What are you doing here?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked into her eyes, eyes that once held love and now only held cold calculation. "I know," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I know about you and the Emperor, and I know what you've done." Tears welled in Jinlian's eyes, but they were not tears of remorse. They were the tears of a woman who had lost everything, who had gambled with her soul and now faced the consequences. She reached out to him, but there was no warmth in her touch. "Please, Dalang," she begged. "This is not what it seems. I never wanted this. I was trying to protect us, to protect our future. But it was too late. The bond between them had been broken beyond repair. The man who had loved her, trusted her, could no longer see the woman he had once shared his life with. He was done with the lies, the deceit, and the betrayal. In that moment, something shifted in Jinlian. She realized that her ambition had cost her everything, her husband, her soul, and now, her very humanity. But the realization came too late, for as she reached for him once more, a shadow fell across them both. Zhao Kuangyin, having overheard their conversation, stepped into the room. His face, once a mask of imperial control, now betrayed a flicker of rage and disappointment. The Emperor's presence silenced the room. Jinlian turned to face him, and for the first time, there was no more game. The Emperor saw the woman she had become, and he felt the full weight of their entanglement. Zhao's voice was cold, like the steel of a blade. "You have played your part well, Jinlian," he said, "but you have overplayed your hand." And so it was, in that final moment, that the lives of these three individuals, each one bound by love, power, and betrayal, reached their inevitable end. Võ Đại Lang, his heart broken and his spirit crushed, found solace in the knowledge that he had stood up for his love. Even when that love had turned against him, the Emperor, the man who had once seemed invincible, was left alone in his throne room, a ruler without a kingdom, a man without a heart, and Jinlian, the woman who had desired power above all else, was left to face the ruins of her ambition, knowing that the price she had paid for it was the destruction of everything she had once held dear. As the sun rose the next morning over the Song dynasty, its golden light illuminated the faces of three souls forever changed. The story of their tragic triangle would live on in the annals of history, an eternal reminder of the cost of power, love, and betrayal.